Hey guys, thanks so much for checking out my channel. I really appreciate it. Please click to subscribe. I'm actually in the airport right now, headed to New York to anchor on News Nation. But I wanted to let you know about something I discovered over the weekend. You guys know the families, many of the victims' families in the Bryan Kohberger case have been very upset that photos have started to come out, been released by authorities, photos from inside the victim's house, really gruesome crime scene photos. And now several of the families are taking legal action. They're taking legal action against the city of Moscow, trying to stop the release of additional photos. There's a lot of requests that have been put in. There's a lot of people trying to get these photos. And now I've learned the families are taking new action to try and stop the release. There's actually going to be a hearing in court this week in Latah County, which is where Moscow, Idaho is, which of course is where the murders happened. I'm going to explain all the latest developments in this episode of Brian Entin Investigates. Leander James, you are the attorney. I know you're representing the Mogens. Are you representing any other families now?
Yeah, as of yesterday, I'm representing the Chapins also.
Okay. And so tell us, Mr. James, what's happening. There's now a legal fight to stop the crime scene photos, additional photos from coming out. Sort of walk us through, because this is the first we're hearing about it, how this started and sort of where things stand.
Well, as you know, this case has garnered a great deal of national, international attention. The reasons for which I don't understand, but it's there. The city of Moscow has received approximately 1,000 FOIA requests. FOIA is the short term for the statute, the Freedom of Information Act statute. There's a federal statute. There's also a state statute, and Idaho has its own FOIA statute. In the Idaho FOIA statute, as in other FOIA statutes, the general concept is that public documents, such as the investigatory documents related to in this case, the city police investigating the murders, is generally open to the public scrutiny. The idea behind FOIA being the whole concept being that in our country, we want to have open access to what the police are doing, how they're doing it, and so forth. So we have transparency. However, there are exceptions. There are some narrow exceptions. And one of the narrow exceptions is when the release of the information would be an unwarranted invasion into the personal privacy of an individual. And the exception is there for a reason. You know, it has a place. Those in the media bray at the idea often of there being any exception. They want to have access to every shred of documentation, images, photograph, including in this case, the death images of the children. But there is this exception, and we, upon being able to see some of the images that the city had released or were going to release, I don't fully know what's going on their end, but I was allowed to look at some of these images. There were images in there that we felt were an unwarranted invasion into the privacy, primarily the death scene images. Now, there's an Idaho case pretty much on point, as we say in law, meaning it's very applicable. There was a judge, Judge Mehta in Ada County, who wrote a very comprehensive opinion relating to a deputy officer who was shot in the line of duty. He had pulled someone over in a public area. And there was in that case, it's kind of important to understand the facts of that case to understand where we are in this case. In that case, what you see in the video camera, the body camera of the officer is the vehicle as he's approaching it. There's a bullet hole in the window, and then he goes down, but you don't see him go down. What you see is the camera ends up looking up at the sky, and so you see the sky and clouds and so forth. And the judge in that case went through a very extensive analysis of the unwarranted invasion of personal privacy and pointed out that in that case, it didn't show the death scene. It didn't show any of the blood or anything. You didn't even hear audio that was related so much to the death. And so ultimately, the judge released that recording. In that case, it was a sheriff's department, I believe, who was opposing media who were trying to get the recording. So applying the fact or the law of that case to the facts of this case, I think you end up in a different point. You'd end up in a point where, and this is what I argued to the court, that you end up in a point where if it shows the death scene images under the analysis of that case, then that's an unwarranted invasion of personal privacy. It also gets to be an unwarranted invasion if it gives rise to what we call a civil action of emotional distress claims on behalf of family members, but that's getting a little bit too much in the weeds. I think for our purposes, it's just important to understand that when under that case, it's implicit in that case that if death scene images are what we're talking about, then releasing them is an unwarranted invasion of personal privacy. So based on that law, I filed on behalf of Karen Laramie, the natural mother of Maddie. I filed a lawsuit asking the court to stop, and we say join in the law, but it's basically stop the city from releasing any of these photos, or if they've released any, to release any more of these images, whether photos or body camera images. The judge held an informal emergency hearing while I filed an ex parte, meaning the other side doesn't have a right or necessarily gets to be involved. I included the city from the very beginning. I had a dialogue with the city attorney. I tried to avoid this situation. My clients did not want to sue the city, but we ultimately had to. And we gave them an opportunity to brief it, to fully brief it, or at least brief it initially with the court, and for the court to have all the information available to help the court make her decision. The judge thankfully came down on our side late Friday night, around 6:30 or 6:45, somewhere in there. She entered a temporary restraining order. So there's sort of levels of this effort to stop the dissemination of these death scene images. The first is a temporary restraining order, and that's where a judge stops in and says, okay, everybody stop. Everybody halt what you're doing. Everybody freeze in place. Okay, there's too much at stake here. There could be irreparable injury if this stuff comes out. So let's just take a deep breath and let's analyze it further. That's what the TRO is, a temporary restraining order. Everybody takes a deep breath and stops. Then she set a hearing this Thursday for the injunction, whether there would be a temporary injunction that would enjoin or stop the city from disseminating these images. And then ultimately, the decision will be made on either Thursday or later on a permanent injunction, whether the city will be permanently enjoined. So that is hopefully I've been concise for you enough and in lay terms enough that it's understandable. That's where we're at.
So basically, you've temporarily won, and you're waiting to find out at the end of this week whether it's permanent.
Yeah, we won to fight another day. We won to we've stopped images from going out. This Thursday, my hope is that with further briefing and argument, that the court will maintain that position. And the order basically says the images of Maddie's bedroom cannot be disseminated. Now, the city has notified the press and me that they're not releasing any of the images of the bedroom scenes, the murder scenes, because of the court's ruling. I think that's the prudent way to go. But now that the Chapins are involved, that involves the other bedroom. So I would hope that the order is expanded to include those images also.
So they released initially some photos which I didn't publish, but I saw them come out, and some of the things were blurred and you can see inside the bedrooms. Is that what you've seen so far that is upsetting, or are there additional images that you saw that you don't want to come out that you're trying to stop?
There are those, and there are additional images, and those are objectionable. Those are part of what we are objecting to, and thankfully, you folks at your organization had the prudence not to publish them. Unfortunately, there have been some that have published them, and the danger for them is they subject themselves to potential liability by publishing these things and harming my clients. But that's something to look at another day. Right now, we're just trying to stop this from going further, because there are more photos of the scene, and also there's a whole large amount of images well, let me back up. For the city, you have more photos, but you also have the webcam images, or the body cam images rather, of the officers coming on the scene, and there's graphic parts in that is very objectionable, should not go out to the public. And so those have not been released. What you've seen is a small amount, I think, of what's in there. And in addition to everything the city has, let's not forget we have the ISP, who has their group of images that people are asking them to release. And I have reason to believe that the ISP is taking a prudent approach, one that I wish the city had taken, and that is to let the judge rule first and get judicial estoppel for all of us. So we have the judge telling us what is or isn't in this subject to this exception. That's the prudent way to go. And I think that's what they're doing. They're waiting to see what this judge will ultimately rule.
I was thinking earlier today, because I've covered this case really sadly since just weeks after the murders happened, but they've been so tight-lipped all along. There was this very strict gag order. We couldn't really get information, basic information at some points. It's just kind of interesting that now it's almost like the opposite is happening. They were so tight on everything, and now they're just releasing these photos, it seems like, without, I mean, there's another family that I spoke to that didn't even get any kind of warning that the photos were coming out.
Yeah, no, and that's true. That's we didn't get any warning. We found out after the fact that some of these had already gone out. And even though my view from the very beginning is, nobody, please don't release these, and everybody, please don't release these until the families have a chance to at least look at them and respond, and maybe go to the court and have a ruling, so everybody is in safe territory. I think it's dangerous to just release this stuff without letting the family see it, or having a judge rule. But yeah, to answer sort of your conundrum there is it's a pretty straightforward answer. During the proceedings, the court, and when I say the court, I mean the judges, were very concerned about the media influencing the jury, and causing disruption to the jury trial and the jury process. And that was a very understandable concern on the part of the courts. I think the courts, there are three primary judges, I think, involved in this case, and I think they all handled themselves excellently. And I think they did the right thing, maintaining a gag order. It's a hard decision on their part, because there's a line there that, again, with the notion in our country that the investigation of a crime and the facts of crime should be transparent for the media and the people and the public. They were struggling with that, but I think they did the right thing with the gag order. Now, once the judge lifted the gag order, then that's no longer in place. And the only thing that protects these images or the families are the exceptions in FOIA. I shouldn't say the only thing. There may be some other legal tools out there, but that's the primary one. And that's what lands us where we are now with the FOIA exception that we're applying.
When you mentioned that you went to the city first, to Moscow first, before filing the lawsuit, to just try to work with them. What happened?
Well, it is my practice. The model, my firm has a motto. Okay, it's helping people solve problems. I came up with that, and that's how I view the law. The law is a tool, and a tool can be used for good or ill. I think the way the law should work and be used is to help solve problems, help bring resolution, help bring peace and accord. And so I always take that approach in all of my practice. I only file lawsuits as a last resort, when you have to use the power of the law to, try to get someone to do what you believe is the right thing. And I don't want to get too far into internal discussions with the city. I want to respect that, but I will say that, as in any one of my cases, I tried to resolve this informally. Now, to be fair to the city and the city's attorney and all, they're dealing with a lot of difficult issues. They have 1,000 or so FOIA requests. These people are pounding at their door, or these companies are pounding at their door, so to speak, demanding this information. And there's certain punitive measures in the FOIA statute. If a governmental agency doesn't respond within a certain period of time, they could get sued. They could be liable for, you have to pay things. It's so I don't want to. I don't want to paint them in a bad light. I want to paint them in a good light. They're trying to do what they think is right, and they're struggling with what that is, and to strike that balance. Um, as we say in the law, reasonable minds can differ, and I think we had a difference, and I had to file this action.
What about the prosecution? Is there anything they can do? Have you spoken to them?
The prosecution team, who has done a stellar job throughout this case, is not so much involved in the decision to disseminate this information. They can have influence. They can, talk to the ISP or the city or others, but it's really the agency's decision. And it's the agency's obligation to analyze the applicable statutes and to disseminate what they feel they're required to under the statute. So in this case, the two that come to mind are the city of Moscow, ultimately the Moscow City Police, but it may be the city itself who makes these decisions, and then the Idaho State Patrol and their attorney.
Do you know, was the prosecutor Bill Thompson, were they surprised to see these items coming out so quickly?
Um, I want to be really respectful of the internal discussions we had. I'll let you ask him that question. I'll just say this, that I think a lot of people were surprised. I don't think I think many of us thought that we would be given notice before anything like this was disseminated.
Um, what has this been like for your clients, for the Mogens, for the Chapins? Um, you know, did they see these photos on the internet? I mean, if you can, it's just awful to even think about, but I think it's important to sort of understand what they're going through.
Yeah, I mean, awful is the modest word. It's absolutely horrible. It's horrific. And I'm not being hyperbolic here. I mean, I talk to these people. I see them and I see their distress. Just the idea that these images could be released, just that alone, is incredibly distressing for all the family members. Now, in our day and age, here's the real problem. Once any one of these gets out, who knows when it's going to pop up? Okay. And these folks, like the rest of us, were online. They maybe go to Facebook or to Instagram or whatever their platform they like is to communicate with people and see jokes and maybe get a distraction away from all these horrors they're living through. Well, now they can't even do that because who knows when one of these images may pop up. The idea that they may be released, and the idea that maybe some of them have been released, really causes them to live daily with an immense amount of stress. On top of the fact that, they've lost their children. This is horrible. And people don't appreciate this. Too often, and I understand the human condition. We hear about people dying in Afghanistan or wherever, and it's just sort of this conceptual, distant, faraway thing. And in this case, you have bloggers and others who have completely disregarded the emotional well-being of the people involved and have speculated and produced all kinds of things and images and said horrible stuff online. That's bad enough. Now you're going to put out these death scene photos of these children for the families to have them printed in their mind for the rest of their lives, or even if they don't look at them, to know that people are looking at these things. This is really terrible stuff. So the bottom line is, yes, they're going through an incredibly painful time now. And it's really unfortunate because I can tell you firsthand, watching Karen and Scott, the mother and stepfather of Maddie Mogen, that when we went through the plea or starting with the plea change of plea hearing, that was a distressing time because I think it was hard on them to hear this guy admit to what he had done. But then when we went through the sentencing hearing, I was pleased to see that their arc of recovery, there's an emotional arc in these cases, and the clients I represent in these crime victim cases. And they had reached a point by the time of the sentencing that they actually had some closure and were able to sort of start to move on somehow. Well, then they get hit with this. all of this ugly stuff getting released. And I mean, there's photographs that we don't want released that we probably can't stop. They're going to be released anyway. The inside of the residence and so forth. That's bad enough. But to have the death scene photos out there, who wants to look at this stuff? I mean, this is just plain wrong. And me personally, I'm a fan of the First Amendment. I appreciate what the media does, and I appreciate transparency and the right of the public to know. But there is a line there somewhere, and I think we're over that line.
So, yeah, just so I can better understand, where is the line for the families? Is it you keep when you say death scene, if you can just kind of describe a little bit like what do they find acceptable versus not acceptable?
Well, I think first of all, for them, I think it's an unwarranted invasion into their privacy for any of the interior photos to get out there or any of the gory photos. Now the law doesn't probably see it that way, and that's what our judge is wrestling with. I think from a legal standpoint, the issue gets to be whether it's an unwarranted invasion of their personal privacy for a specific image to be released. And I think the core images here are images of the death scene, the bodies, and those types of things. Okay, where the murders took place. Those I think are the most objectionable and are an unwarranted invasion and should not be released.
Is it too much to ask, or would it have been that unusual to sit all the families down, and t tell them how this process was going to happen and show them the photos if they wanted and give them the police reports, even if it was just days before releasing them publicly? I mean, is that just in other cases I've covered that's happened. I know with the FBI in a case I covered, the FBI did that with a family. Um,
Right.
are you surprised that didn't happen here?
Oh, I don't know that I'd say surprise. It's unfortunate it didn't happen, but I can see why it may not have. I mean, first of all, uh, there is no statutory requirement that the governmental entity do those very, humane and thoughtful things of, educating the family members and giving them a chance to adjust to what may come out. Um, uh, so I'm familiar, for example, with the 9/11 case where family members were told. I've been involved in other cases where the governmental entity took the time to sit down with the family members, show them the information and images, and give them a chance to, comment and so forth. And in some cases, they even have, uh, psychologists or mental health professionals available to help these people deal with it. Here we're dealing with the city of Moscow, is a small city, a small town in Idaho with limited resources. So it doesn't really shock me that they didn't offer all of these, things to the family members. It would be nice if they did. I think the state of Idaho probably could. But some people that thought doesn't come across their radar because they're focused on the law and what the law strictly requires. What you're asking about here is very important and thoughtful things that the governmental agencies can do that's beyond what the law requires, but it's the right thing to do. So I would welcome any effort to at least give the family members notice of what may come out. And I would welcome any effort to help educate them, give them a voice, and to make them part of the process. And ultimately, I would welcome any help in the mental health arena to help these people deal with this trauma, because it's a real trauma now.
If you lose at the end of the week, is there anything else you can do, or do the photos just come out?
We can file an appeal, and I would hope I would be given time to do that. We can file an appeal. So that's really the answer to that. That's the avenue to go, is to file the appeal.
Anything else you think is important, sir?
Well, two things. I would ask anybody who sees this to think of the parents and the family members of these kids who were killed, and to think about how they would feel if they were in their situation, and to not view these photos. Please don't look at them if they're out there. And I would also similarly say to any news organization who didn't do what your organization did, who actually has published them or is thinking about publishing them, I would implore them not to go there. Don't do it. And I don't want to sound threatening. I think as a matter of just morality, on ethics, I think it's important not to go there. If they go there, though, they put me in a difficult spot where then we have to consider whether they have legal liability for the damage they're causing by publishing these photos. And like I say, I want peace. I don't want, conflict. So just don't publish them, and there'll be no conflict. And let's bring peace to these families and allow them to move on free of this ongoing media circus.
Well, thank you for your time, sir.